Ciao a tutti, this is Marcello from Vito, Italy. In the last episode, we talked about the conquer of Sicily by the Allies. We are between mid-July and end of July 1943. And with the Allies occupying for the first time a portion of Italy, the country's future is now in the hands of two men, the King, Vittorio Emanuele III, and the Duce, Mussolini. And this time Italians are losing their faith in Mussolini's absolute capacities, and they're turning towards the institution of the monarchy for direction, for leadership. But who is this King of Italy, Vittorio Emanuele III? Well, on July 29th, 1900, at the age of 30, Vittorio Emanuele had acceded to the throne upon his father's assassination by an anarchist. In his early years, the new king showed a commitment to the constitutional freedoms. But when World War I began, Italy at first remained neutral, and then in 1915 it signed several secret treaties committing the country to enter the war on the side of the Triple Entente. That's Russia, Great Britain and France. Most of the politicians opposed the war, however, and the Italian Chamber of Deputies forced Prime Minister Salandra, who wanted the war, to resign. Okay, so the war would not be declared, but Vittorio Emanuele declined Salandra's resignation and personally decided for Italy to enter a war. It was a coup, by all means. The economic depression following World War I gave rise to much extremism among Italy's working classes. This caused the country to become politically unstable, and Mussolini, the leader of the right-wing fascist party, took advantage of this instability for his rise to power. In 1922, in October, he led a force of fascist supporters on a march on the capital, Rome. And the Prime Minister, Facta, he drafted a decree of martial law, but the king refused to sign it. So he was worried about the rising power of the communists who were obviously anti-monarchic and used Mussolini and his party to stop the left from taking power, and possibly they could end the monarchy. The king, who was sure at the time to control Mussolini, failed to move against the regime's abuses of power. Actually, he went along with Mussolini very well in the first years, and he remained silent during the winter of 1925-26, when Mussolini dropped all pretense of democracy. So during this time, the king signed without protest laws that eliminated freedom of speech and assembly, abolished the freedom of the press, and declared the fascist party to be the only legal party in Italy. Among other laws, he unfortunately signed the famous leggi razziali, the racial laws against the Jews, which were an imitation of the tough legislation effective in those times in Germany against the Jews. Well, only in the late 30s, the king started to get disappointed with Mussolini, who was taking all decisions without even informing him. And so it was keeping him in the shade. And Mussolini argued all through May 1940 that since it was evident that Germany was going to win the war, there was an unparalleled chance for Italy to make major gains at the expense of France and Great Britain. This would allow Italy to become the dominant power in the Mediterranean. And finally, on June 1st, 1940, the king gave Mussolini his permission for Italy to enter the war. It was the famous stab in the back of France, which in the future will raise hatred between the two countries. Now, in mid-July 1943, the king decides to get rid of Mussolini. The anti-monarchist currents extend especially among young people, and the monarchy would only survive with an action that meets national sentiment, now opposed to fascism and war. But the time has to be right. July 19th, Mussolini meets Hitler at Villa Gaggia, near Venice. As Hitler presses him for the negative test of Italian soldiers in Sicily, the news of the bombing of Rome with the devastation of the district of San Lorenzo come. Only 9 days before, following numerous pleas by Pope Pius XII that Rome be spared, President Roosevelt had written the Pope that churches and religious institutions will, to the extent that it is within our power, be spared the devastations of war during the struggle ahead. But it's not possible to spare Rome. For the Allies, it is important to disrupt enemy communications and interdict the supply of German and Italian forces from northern Italy to Sicily via Rome and Naples. So they target the Littorio and Ciampino airdromes and the railway marshalling yards at Littorio and San Lorenzo. But the San Lorenzo radars lay less than 1.5 miles from Rome's most famous monument, the Colosseum, and immediately adjacent to one of the most revered churches of Rome, the Basilica di San Lorenzo fuori le mura. Rome is a target, and this can be a formidable push for Italians to get out of the war. Starting from 11 a.m., for more than 2 hours, an enormous formation of more than 500 bombers skirt the Vatican and release almost 1 million tons of explosives from an altitude of more than 6,000 meters, targeting the airports and the railways. While the raid devastates the marshalling yards, some bombs miss their target and hit adjacent university and hospital buildings, the nearby Cimitero del Verano, the Verano Cemetery, and the Basilica di San Lorenzo. More than 2,000 people die. During the bombings, the Pope stands at the window in his private study and watches it through binoculars. Then, ignoring security concerns, he departs Vatican City for the San Lorenzo area, and here, amid the rubble and a flock of desperate people, he kneels and prays for the victims of this and other raids. After this bombing, everyone is waiting for something to happen, including the king, who awaits the right opportunity to get rid of Mussolini. And this comes with the convocation of the meeting of the Gran Consiglio del Fascismo, Great Council of Fascism, for the afternoon of July 24th. Mussolini has summoned it because he has been urged by the other fascist leaders to discuss the progress of the war and possibilities for Italy. A few days earlier, the agenda has been drawn calling for Mussolini's resignation, and he is aware of it, but he decided to be present anyway, because he thinks that he's still supported by the king and the majority of the leaders of fascism. After all, he created fascism and he created these leaders. It's a long meeting. Mussolini makes an account of the war and claims to be still able to win thanks to the science fiction new weapons of the Germans. But at the end of a dramatic confrontation, the council votes for his resignation and asks Mussolini himself to present it to the king. On July 25th in the morning, Mussolini asks the king to be received in the afternoon. He is still convinced that after the night's rebellion, the leaders are eager to repent and that a reshuffle of government seats would be enough. But the king has no intention to save Mussolini. At the hearing, he informs the Duce that he has decided to accept his resignation and appoint Marshal Badoglio as head of government. Then he accompanies him out of Villa Savoia. Waiting for Mussolini, there is an ambulance that will take him to a military base of the Carabinieri. That evening, in a national radio address, the king announces the acceptance of Mussolini's resignation and Marshal Badoglio's appointment as the new leader of the country. A joy explodes on the streets of Italian cities, meaning above all one thing: the end of fascism is the prelude to the end of the war. But Badoglio also says in his radio message that Italy keeps its word with the Germans. So the war continues, even without Mussolini. What will happen next? See you next time. Bye bye. Ciao ciao.